Welcome to the Chase Hudson Show, a podcast dedicated to inspiring you to become extraordinary. Each week, we sit down with top-tier business owners, real estate investors, and influencers to inspire you to build your legacy. It's time to level up. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Hudson Show. Today we have Kurt Workman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Owlet Baby Care, the creator of the Smart Sock Baby Monitor, as well as a few other fantastic products. This is a great episode. Kurt shares the story of starting Owlet during his college years, raising capital from angel investors, seed investors, going public, and the story and really the life-altering and life-saving story of Owlet Baby Care and the inspiration behind it. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear Kurt's story. And with that, let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Chase Hudson Show. Today we have Kurt Workman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Owlet Baby Care, the creator of the Smart Sock Baby Monitor, as well as the Owlet Cam and the Owlet Band. As its founder and CEO, Kurt has been an advocate for infant healthcare since founding the venture back in 2013. Forbes has called Owlet the next billion-dollar startup. Entrepreneur included on their list of 100 brilliant companies. Owlet also has won Best Wearable and Tech to Change the World at the Consumer Electronics Show. So quite an impressive resume there, Kurt. Welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Chase.
Yeah, this is fun. Usually the first question I ask Kurt is to talk just a little bit about your upbringing. So, anything in your childhood or teenage years that would help people understand, what molded you, what inspired you to kind of be the person that you are today.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty introspective question. I think a couple things. One, I feel like I was born an entrepreneur. I don't know what it is. Like growing up, I always said I wanted to be a builder and an artist. And then when I think I was like 10 years old, my cousin came to town from Idaho, and he brought all these like surplus fire starter kits. And he's like, "Hey, Kurt, we're gonna go around and sell these door to door." And I'm like, "What?" So we went around and they were like these little kits with little, like, they looked like soap bars. And he'd pull one out and he'd light it on somebody's porch and then knock on the door and say, "Hey, this thing will, stay lit for an hour," and would sell them door to door. And he bought them for like 10 cents each and he was selling them for like $2 and he made a ton of money. And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's pretty cool." So the sales component, I think, came in then. But when I was in junior high, I loved to paintball. I started a paintball business. All of my friends in junior high did their job shadow with like their dads. It was like a lawyer or a dentist or something. And I went to a paintball shop. I'm like, this is the coolest thing. I want to just like own a paintball shop. And so I started one in my basement. I got like those big CO2 canisters and sold paint. We built a paintball course in my backyard. Did paintball tournaments. We had like a video camera, and like I built in this old horse shed, built like a lounge area so people could hang out, and just loved like building and creating. I think that's been a big part of my life, and have always looked to do that. Just always working on projects. My family, I'm one of five, so I'm the second oldest. I'm the only entrepreneur. I don't know how like the gene struck me, but two awesome parents. I had just like a really good childhood. There was no trauma. No, I don't think I had anything hard. My parents always made us feel like we were poor, but we were fine. Had everything that I needed. My mom is from Eastern Idaho. She grew up on a potato farm. My dad's one of 9 kids. His dad was a seminary teacher. So they were both poor growing up. And I think that just kind of infused in us. And I think, part of the desire to be an entrepreneur is that, my dad never talked about his job like he liked his job. It was always like, I have to go to work. And there was something about, I think, growing up and wondering, am I going to feel like a servant to my job my whole life? I wanted freedom. I don't even think it was money necessarily that was motivating, but just like freedom. And so, I in high school, I learned how to do flooring, so like tile and carpet. And then as soon as I got back from my mission, I started a flooring company because it was like, oh, I can do this myself, and make more money. So that paid for college for me. So, just always trying to figure out a way to not feel like I'm locked into a 9 to 5 was a big part of growing up. And then I just loved the creative side too. So grew up in, I'm going all around here.
You're great. No,
grew up in Farmington, Utah. So I'm from Utah. We actually moved back to Farmington a few years ago. Lived in New York for just like a very short period of time. Did a mission in Mexico, and then went to BYU. So,
love it, man. That's great. Yeah, sounds like from the get-go, you had some good influences on the entrepreneur side, and then just itching to do it on your own and create ways to make money. And to your point, I've always struggled too with, I feel like people as a child, and especially in the workforce, there's always this thing of like, I really didn't like being told what to do, and not that I can't, not that I'm, and I'm totally fine with it. And no one would have ever seen that, but internally it was like, man, I wish I had some control here of like when I could, go into work, when I could leave, when I could, and it didn't feel like I was forced to go and please somebody else. And so I think that resonates really well with a lot of the listeners and people who are perhaps in a job or have quit a job or what have you. So appreciate you sharing that. So then going into college, mentioned you went to BYU. What was your thought process going into school? Because you had already started a couple businesses, your flooring company, et cetera. Was college just, hey, I want to, means to an end in terms of I want to go get a job, or just network and then become an entrepreneur? Like, how did you approach going into school?
I mean, I think part of it is like I didn't know that there was another option. It was sort of like I was raised like, you're going to get a college degree. And I ended up dropping out, which was the only one in my family who did that. But it just, I always planned on getting a college degree. I didn't totally know what I wanted to do. My parents had kind of encouraged me to get an engineering degree and then go get an MBA. So that was kind of the path that my dad wanted for all of his kids. And we all started on that path, and only one of us, did it. So it was going to be engineering and then an MBA. So I studied chemical engineering. I love chemistry. I love, it was fascinating to me. They also, the department there was a good department. So I started studying that. I got 4 years into it. It's a 5-year bachelor's degree. And that's when I started to work on Owlet and ended up dropping out. But it was always kind of, the plan was get kind of a technical background and then go into business after that.
Yeah, that's smart. And I feel like that's a great way to do it. A lot of young students, when I was there at BYU as a senior or even after, like, what should I study? Like, what should I really like marketing. Should I just get a marketing degree or advertising or what have you? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think if you're going to be at school and be spending the hours, I think a technical background, finance, engineering, chemical, whatever it is, you can learn a lot of those soft skills, elsewhere. So I think
you totally get I think it depends on what you're optimizing for, because my, upbringing was very much optimized for security. And so having a technical degree created more security for you.
Right.
And my advice to like my kids and to others, like, just do what you love. Mm-hmm. Like, just go all in on what you love. And, if you do that, then you don't have to worry about freedom, because you're just doing what you love. Yeah. And, there's nobody starves in Utah. It's like, I don't want to diminish not having, enough wealth or enough excess, but I think we generally live pretty well here. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing what you love, I believe, more money, less money, that's less important than just doing what you love. And I remember like thinking in college, like, oh, this industrial design program looks really interesting. It's like product design. And was kind of discouraged early on. My dad was like, no, you're going to end up designing the back of keyboards and it doesn't differentiate you enough and it's not secure enough. And so I look at, like, I've hired a bunch of industrial designers now and I'm like, that looks so fun. Mm-hmm. Like I wish I had, gotten into that. So I tell people, just do what like really calls to you, and the money part will figure itself out.
Yeah,
so
that's great. Love it, Kurt. Yeah. So I saw that, I guess, prior to Owlet, you had a couple of other, experiences, Venture Factory being one, ClearLink, and then Techstars, I think, was kind of a platform that helped, start companies. But talk us through kind of your early career, pre-Owlet. What were you doing?
Yeah. So for the first few years, I had a flooring company. So I was going to college. So I do like on the weekends, I do, showers or bathrooms or entryways, and made pretty good money doing that. A lot better than working, I worked for the BYU library for like 6 months, and I was like, gosh, I'm making like $7 an hour. Like, no way. So yeah, I went around and I would tile people's entryways on the weekends and paid for college that way. Then while in college, I got this flyer of a competition that they had in the school called Student Innovator of the Year. And you get like a $400 grant, and you could work on some new invention idea. And I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. So I was trying to think of like an idea to put through that. And then I saw that there was a job opening for this group called Venture Factory that ran Student Innovator of the Year. So I went and applied for this engineering position at Venture Factory, and they said I was like in year 2. I didn't have enough experience to be hired for that, but they liked that I had like a skinny tie on for the interview. And then I think in the engineering school, it was like nobody wore cool skinny ties. So they were like, you'd be great on the marketing side, like help us run this Student Innovator of the Year competition. So they hired me to run that. I ran it for 2 years and we built it up. I think the first year there were like 30 participants. We got it to 100. We got it out into like Brigham Square. And then the second year we got more funding, bigger prizes, and it really grew. Today it still runs every year. There's hundreds of, applicants and participants. It's a really cool program there that we helped build. And then from there, the guy who hired me, this is all like a student run organization at BYU. They had me become the president, and Venture Factory is essentially a student engineering organization that would build products for entrepreneurs, student entrepreneurs. So we built, like an automatic dog feeder and, some soles you could like stick onto your feet when you're going to like a hot water park, just like little ideas that entrepreneurs at BYU had. And that was really cool because it's kind of an introduction to this world of entrepreneurship. My previous version of entrepreneurship was like flooring company, paintballs, like very kind of service industry. And this was kind of my first introduction into tech, which was really cool.
Yeah, I love it. So how did the idea of Owlet Baby Care come to be? You got your flooring company, you're getting some exposure, it sounds like, via Venture Factory to this more venture tech side. Yeah, I would love to hear like why baby care, why start this company at that time?
I think I was kind of in this ecosystem. I was watching friends start companies. I thought it was the coolest thing to see them like win a competition or launch a Kickstarter. It just really called to me. I'm like, I really want to do that. And so I had a bunch of different ideas I was working on. And I remember driving from Farmington down to Provo. I just like spent some time with my family. And like the realization hit me that, you only get 4 or 5, if you start a company, let's say it's 10 years of your life, minimum, if it's successful, you only get like 4 or 5, 10-year chunks of your career. And so I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I had this like big perspective on life. And I was like, I want to do something that actually makes a difference. Like, I don't want to spend 10 years, like a fourth of my working career on something that's just a gadget. And that became like a really good filter for me. At the same time, Shay and I were talking about starting our family. We'd been married for like 3.5 years. So in Utah years, that's like a long time to wait to have kids. And we were visiting her cardiologist to see if she was healthy enough to get pregnant. She's had 3 heart surgeries. Wow. And they said, she's, healthy and good and she can have kids, but your kids might have the same thing. I guess it was kind of potentially a genetic issue. And that like froze me because I was like, I don't know if I want to have kids. This is scary to me because when she was a baby, they didn't detect it. So they sent her home from the hospital. And a few days later, her mom just had a feeling to go check on her, walked into the room while she was taking a nap and found her blue and not breathing. And they rushed her to the hospital and did heart surgery that saved her life. And so just that thought of like, how would I know if my child needed me? We've had SIDS deaths in the extended family. And so it was just very on my mind. And I thought, man, I'm going to need something, to help. And sound and video monitors are great, but you kind of have to monitor the monitor to know baby's okay. So that was on my mind. And then a friend that was working as a nurse at the University of Utah Hospital came to me and he was like, hey, we use this technology called pulse oximetry, which is that little red light that they put on your finger. It's in your Apple Watch now. And he's like, patients keep pulling it off their finger in the hospital. And it's a huge pain for nurses. Like, let's build a wireless one. And as I learned more about this technology, I'm like, I don't want that for patients. I want that to like monitor my baby at home. And so we started to work on this concept of a little sock that could wrap around your baby's foot, track their heart rate and oxygen, could notify you if something was off. The number still today, and it hasn't changed in 25 years, the number one cause of infant mortality is SIDS. 99% of the time, SIDS happens when parents are away from the baby. That's the strongest correlation with SIDS. And so we felt like, hey, if you can just notify parents that something's changed, a baby can't die without their oxygen levels changing. Maybe in a lot of cases, parents can intervene. And so that was kind of the early thesis was, give parents peace of mind, help them detect, issues with their baby's health and help them be there when their baby needs them. And that's kind of where the idea, the name of Owlet came was, this idea that like we're up all night so parents don't have to be. And so, yeah, that's kind of where the idea came from.
Yeah. I love the name. And it sounds like really was inspired by, your own personal experience with your wife and just wanting to have that sense of comfort and understanding of your baby. And we have 3 kids. And so it resonates with me as well. I love it. So yeah, what was that first? I mean, so you have this concept. How did you guys go from there? I mean, when it comes to, idea to execution, getting a product, manufacturing it, the funding, kind of walk us through some of that.
Yeah. Oh man, walk you through 5 years of pain. For me, it started with, I wanted good co-founders. And there were 2 guys that I'd worked with at BYU, both at this venture factory group we'd worked at. One was an electrical engineer that was just brilliant. He was finishing up school, but he was already working for rocket ship design. He'd actually built things that people were using. His name is Zach Baumsta. And then the other one, his name is Jordan Monroe. He had gone through kind of the whole competition circuit at BYU for the business plan competition with a company called Phone Soap, which is doing extremely well today, and was one of the co-founders of Phone Soap. And I was like, man, if I could get those guys help, I think we could make this work. And it, again, I feel like it just like the universe brought us together. I happened to run into Zach on campus. I was working on a little circuit board for Owlet, and he said, hey, what are you doing? And I told him kind of the background and the story. And he said, dang it, I was up all night last night with my 3-week-old that has croup and she's not breathing. And he's like, I need to help you. It was just kind of crazy. Like, I didn't even ask him for help. He's like, I want to get involved. So we started to work together. And then Jordan, kind of similar thing. We met up and I told him, hey, I need some help with the marketing side of this. And he was super interested. And so he jumped in. And I think those 2 really made kind of the difference for me in the early years. Just both brilliant, had a little bit more experience than me. I tell people, I'm like, look, a 7 can't hire a 10, but if your mission's a 10, you can. And so we were able to attract really great people early on. We won, the 3 of us kind of going through these competitions, we won like $250,000 in competition winnings. We'd go around the country and just like compete in these business plan competitions.
Wow.
And then that funded kind of the early development. We then applied to Techstars, which was, I think, an awesome opportunity for us because it got us out of the Utah ecosystem. We were a hardware device, a little bit smaller market, opportunity with, 4 million babies versus like an Apple Watch. So you got like 90, million adults that you can sell to, more than 90 million. So getting out of the Utah ecosystem and going through that experience was super helpful. It helped us learn how to kind of fundraise and gave us a bigger network of investors. So I recommend to everybody, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, go to an accelerator program, get out of Utah. Fundraising is a lot easier. There's a lot more capital. So we were able to get out, raise a $2 million seed round. And then it took us about 3 years to get the product to market. Like we spent we thought we could get it out in a year, and we started manufacturing a year later. We'd launched a Kickstarter. We, pre-sold like 3,000 units. We made 3,000 units. And then as we were kind of doing the final testing, we realized there was an issue with all of the units we'd built.
Ugh.
So we threw 3,000 units away. This is right before we raised our seed round. And I remember meeting at this like diner in New York. We were at the Techstars accelerator, and we're like, okay, we're out of money. We just spent all of our pre-order money on these units that we built that we have to throw away. What are we going to do? And there was like 8 of us at the time. Everyone was like, I can work for like another 3 or 4 months without getting paid. And just kind of, we all decided to kind of lean in again. And we went and raised a seed round and offered all of our customers, said, hey, you can click this button and get a refund because it's going to be another year. Or you can click this button and continue to support the project. 90% of parents supported the project. They knew that they couldn't use it for their baby, but they wanted to see this, kind of come to the market. Awesome customers. And so we were able to get help from them and then help from raising a seed round and then spent another 2 years developing the product and going through rounds and rounds of testing. I think we had 12 iterations of the product before we finally launched it.
Wow.
Yeah. So just kind of, we decided it's a product for baby safety. So unless it passed all the tests and had,
right.
parents raving about it, we just waited to launch. And I think that ended up being the most strategic decision we made, was just to be patient. Because once we launched, it really took off, and then we had a new set of challenges to solve. So
yeah. So how old were you when you started? What idea you co-founded with your partners, kind of creation there, and then how long did it take to get, or how old were you when we
launched?
Finally launched it?
Yeah.
4 or 5 years later, right?
Yeah, it was. Well, no, it was 3 years. So
okay.
I was 24 when we kind of started working on it, and then 27 when we launched.
Okay. And that was what year? About 2013?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we launched in 2016.
Okay. And I'm curious, and whatever you can share here, but when you had your co-founders and you guys met up and talked about how are we going to split this up? Like, how are we going to split roles and responsibilities, ownership? Are people bringing money into this thing? Like, how did you think about that? Because I think those early conversations are really important down the road when you start raising seed capital, when you start having to think about how you're, going public or what have you. How did those initial conversations go, and how did you divvy that up?
Yeah, it was kind of, I would say, pretty organic, and I think it's okay, but there were some issues with that because there were a couple other people involved too early on. And so it was kind of like, I owned the majority of the business. There were a couple other people, and then I added Jordan and Zach, and these other people weren't necessarily kind of pulling their weight. And so over time, we kind of we continue to kind of reform the cap table based on who was adding the most value.
Yep.
And those were really painful conversations. Ended up, we had somebody leave, and great person, but just it wasn't working out. And then we were able to give some more equity to those who were helping. And so it was a pretty kind of, I would say, very kind of organic process, but painful too, because early on it's you got to be careful who you give equity to, but you also just don't know, which is why you vest over 4 years. I tell everybody, just like, hey, it's a 4-year vest, even yourself, like make sure you're vesting so that the business doesn't get into a weird kind of ownership position before you know who you're really going to be partners with.
Right.
So, and you spend more time with your co-founders than you do with your wife, than you do with your kids. Like, it's 12 hours a day, those kind of early days, and it's highly emotional, so it evolved is how I would describe it.
Yeah. Makes sense. That's good. That's good advice. In terms of the actual manufacturing, and development of a device, just curious, like how do you go from concept on paper to having a product that's shipped to you? I mean, I'm sure there's so many steps that go into that, but it's like I'm calling a factory in China. Have a designer. Like, how did that actually come to fruition with the physical product?
Yeah, I would say the right way to do it, and then I'll tell you how we did it.
Yeah.
I think the right way to do it is you start with a really good understanding of your requirements. Like, what is this product actually solving for your customer? And you really want to like whittle that down to like a minimum viable product. Like, what's the minimum viable product that solves this problem? And you want to actually write that out before you design, before you sketch, before you build anything. You've got a Word doc and you're just like answering questions. And most entrepreneurs skip that step because they just want to build. It's like you want to just jump right into building. But that's really where it should start. And then you take it to a design phase where you get, an industrial designer, if it's a physical product, or a UX designer, if it's software. And you make sure that you take those requirements, and then you have a really good understanding of the user experience. From there, you start to build, and you go through iterations on building and testing and building and testing. And then you get into kind of a beta test, and then you ship, right? And if you're doing a hardware product, you start kind of different phases of production units that you're building and testing. So that's like the right way to do it. I think most entrepreneurs just start building, which is what we did. And our feature list grew way too long. Like we were tracking babies' diaper changes and temperature and just over featured this thing. And we built a lot of like really mediocre features, and we went to test, and users were like, it's hard to use. There's a lot of stuff here that I don't need. Like what I really want is just, I want my baby's heart rate and oxygen, and I want to know if it changes. Like that was it. So we redefined our minimum viable product, and that makes everything else easier because you're not trying to solve every corner case. It was just going to be during sleep, just those features. And we really focused on that. And then when we launched, we had a competitor that had not focused on kind of the minimum viable product. A bunch of smart guys from Google and IDEO out of California, and we both launched at the same time. And they had a lot more money. They got a lot more kind of video views and traction. So we thought we had failed. We're like these, bumpkins from Provo, Utah, had never built a company before, but we were so focused on just those features that what we found out later is that they had spent a ton of money to get all their video views, and nobody bought their product. We spent nothing, and we had a ton of people pre-ordering our product. And so I think those early phases of like really focus on what's the smallest amount of features that solve the biggest problem for your customer makes a big difference. And then, I think it's a blend of, you don't want to recreate the wheel. So if you're doing something that's been done before, don't try and do it yourself. Hire that out. Find somebody who's doing it. So like contract manufacturing, we tried to build units in-house because we just wanted to like own everything. That wasted a bunch of time. But something like designing the sock, nobody designed like a wearable pulse oximeter for babies before. And, I think our team did a really good job of that. This is just another, sorry if I'm taking too long on this, but
great.
Another tangent. I spent $50 with a student designer at BYU, and he drew out a bunch of concepts for us, helped us through the design. As we were going through this, our investors felt like, hey, maybe you guys need to get like some professional help on this product. So we hired a design firm for $150,000, and they spent like 4 weeks on the project, and they didn't create a single unique concept that was different than the student had for $50 spending a day on it. So I think you can be super scrappy in certain areas, and then other areas like manufacturing or just things that people have already built a good system around. You want to piggyback on those systems. So, yeah.
And I like to go into the weeds sometimes on some of the stuff, because if someone's listening, like, how do you actually execute on something, right? Like from concept to creation. So I appreciate you diving in there. So from, the first 3 years trying to get off the ground, sounds like that the 3,000 units, huge setback, but then you raised a $2 million seed round. So take us from kind of that point. Like, how did it go for the next, few years?
Yeah. It was like every 6 months, we thought we were 6 months away from launching the product. And I think that ended up being kind of part of the success was we were just always trying to launch, and then it would fail and we'd fix it. Have you ever seen the marshmallow challenge?
Yep.
You've seen that?
With the kids?
With the kids, yeah, that build up. And like the kindergartners actually do a better job than the CEOs at building these marshmallow tower structures, because they stick the marshmallow up top and then they build from the bottom up. And as it leans, they reinforce it. We didn't know we were doing that. We didn't know we had this kind of agile go-to-market strategy, but that's exactly what we did. And so every 6 months, we had a new version that we would go out, and we had what we called our mommy army. It was like 100 moms in Utah County that were willing to test the product for us. So we'd take the new batch to their house, and it would, fail. And they'd give us a bunch of feedback, too many alarms. We were testing on my son. I remember my wife coming to me, and she's like, you should just give the money back to your investors, because it was, it was like 14 alarms every night. It just wasn't working, and it wasn't. And so, there's like a lot of like tough things to work through, but we just kept doing that. And the product kept getting better. We kept going through these rounds of testing. Every time we'd get feedback, we'd make adjustments. And finally felt like we were there. We'd done all of our accuracy testing. It was as accurate as the hospital monitors. We'd done a ton of beta testing. Our net promoter score was in the 80s. People loved the product. And we had our first kind of life-saving story. It was a friend of mine at college who they'd lost their oldest to SIDS. I think this was a couple years later. And he called and he said, hey, I keep getting these red, low oxygen alarms. Can you guys look into it? And I said, yeah, it's probably a bug. Like, don't worry. He said, yeah, but here's kind of our history with my daughter. And so if you could look into it, that'd be great. So we shared the data with our medical advisor, and he took a look at it and he said, that baby needs to be in the hospital like right now. And so they took her into the hospital. They did a sleep study. She just couldn't regulate her breathing at night. Like her oxygen would dip down into like the 60s. She couldn't breathe. She just stopped breathing at certain times. And so she ended up being on oxygen for a few years until her brain developed more and she was able to regulate her own breathing. And we were so proud of that. It was like, okay, product works, it's accurate, people love it, and it's making a difference. And so finally we decided to launch. And there's that saying, like, if you launch and it doesn't go well, it's fine because nobody heard about it. So just launch again. And that was kind of our experience. We thought when we launched this product, people, if we launched as kind of a baby monitor, buying baby monitor search ads, that would be the perfect time to find customers. And so we did this big launch. I think we spent like $50,000 in advertising and nobody bought the product. It was like $1,000 per acquisition. And we were looking at the data, we were scratching our heads like, what? We spent all this time. We know people love it. We know it solves the problem. Why didn't it work? And I think what we realized is that once somebody knew they were going to buy a baby monitor, they already had a video camera or an audio monitor in their mind. And so we were just too far downstream. So we relaunched, and this time, instead of doing baby monitor search terms, we created video and blog content with partners, and then we would advertise to the blogger's website or their Instagram account, and just have people have like a really authentic educational experience. And we tried to target people earlier in that journey, and that worked really well. Pretty soon we had 50 million views on one of our videos. We were able to boost that. And within a few months, we were doing, $1 million a month in revenue. So it was like a couple kind of failed launch tries. And then finally we got the marketing right.
Yeah,
so,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, just talk about perseverance and pivoting and just being able to, and then you mentioned influencers. I feel like I've had the Dime Beauty guys, I had PMD on here. I've had a lot of entrepreneurs, and it feels like for most of them, the catalyst was really diving into the influencer market and the bloggers and the really who is using your product and trying to capitalize on that. So it sounds like similar to kind of what you guys did. So that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I feel like it's so much more grit and just, being willing to fail and then try again than it is intelligence.
So. Yeah, exactly. Perseverance. So
yeah.
From there, and what year was that when you felt like, okay, we've got a viable product, we've officially like launched this thing and things are starting to get
our first year is 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So from there, how did the next, 5-6 years go as you guys started to grow? It sounds like from looking at your website, you did some diversification across products. You introduced a few new concepts. So what were the next 5 or 6 years like?
Yeah. They were, I want to say awesome because we finally had a product in market. We had customers. That was a lot of fun. And we kept solving problems. We call it our Pareto list. So we would get feedback from every customer that used the app, and then we would create kind of a Pareto list of problems and just tackle each problem one by one. And ended up launching 3 new versions of the product just to continue to solve those problems. And that, like, each new version unlocked a new kind of level of growth for the business. I think one thing about the parenting community is that it's so tight. It's like word of mouth travels lightning fast. And so the best growth strategy is just to have an amazing product that people love. And so that was kind of our focus for the first, still today, but especially those first few years. So we kept working on the product. We realized that, online sales were doing really well, and the next level of growth was to get into retail. Parents, sign up for registry. It's a huge growth lever. Our early costs of goods sold were too high to get into retail because we just would lose money on every unit. So we worked on kind of cost improvement with improved features. We moved manufacturing from Salt Lake City to Mexico and Thailand. And that actually, what's funny is the quality actually improved significantly just because they manufacture so many units out there. They've got better equipment, and the cost came down dramatically. And so that got us ready to launch into retail. We said no to a lot of retailers for a while. It was like online, Amazon, then we went specialty retail. And I think this was a good strategy because it kept all of our margin dollars to go back into advertising to build more awareness. So by the time we got into Target and Walmart, they were begging us for the product. I mean, it was like, hey, you're like the number one missed search item on our website for baby products. We need you. And that allowed us to negotiate really good rates with the retailers that we still have today. So just kind of slowly worked into market. And as we got into each new retailer, it felt like the customers were there. So our sales would increase. They were all super happy. It kind of expanded their categories. What we found is that most parents would still buy a video camera or an audio monitor and a health monitor. So, continue to grow that way. And then we realized that 70% of our customers were buying a video camera, and it was our kind of the number one thing that they were asking for from us. So we designed our own Owlet camera and launched that in 2019. That did extremely well, does really well today. And it's just kind of like, it's just a really simple value prop. With one click of a button, I can see my baby, hear my baby, and know that they're okay. And so that's done well. And then we launched a sleeper. We started to work on a pregnancy band, grew revenue to about 100 million in revenue, and went public through a SPAC in 2021. And something about going public and kind of the public visibility created some issues with the FDA. We ended up running into a warning letter with them where they wanted us to reclassify the product. So we had to make a few changes to the product. We were off the market for about 3 months right after going public. It was awful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then we relaunched in January of 2022, kind of rebuilt the business from there. And we just got our first kind of full FDA clearance for the product. So
congratulations.
Yeah. So that's high level journey.
Yeah. So impressive, Kurt. That's wow. So talking about going public. I mean, that's a feat that many entrepreneurs aspire to do. What was that process like, and why decide to go public versus staying private?
Yeah, it's a good question. We felt like we had a pretty unique mission. We talked to like Philips and Johnson & Johnson and some other companies, and it was pretty clear they've just kind of got a different focus in this space. And a lot of people didn't want to talk about SIDS. They didn't want to talk about some of these really tough challenges that parents are facing. And so our mission early on was always like, hey, we want to remain our own entity. We want to, grow and be a public company. We want to build, the biggest tech platform for pediatrics, and, felt like we could kind of preserve that mission if we went public and continue to grow. So that was kind of always the aspiration. I think we were probably 3 or 4 years away from where we would normally go public. But the SPAC market was, really accelerating. There was a lot of opportunities. We had somebody come in and say, hey, we can raise $200 million for you guys and take you public if you go now. And we were like, okay, that's more fuel, for the fire. And so decided to do it. It was like a 1 year process where our, legal and accounting team were just working nonstop, probably 16-hour days to get ready. You have to do 3 years of audited financials. We had audited financials, but we had to re-audit them with a larger partner, just all of that stuff to kind of get ready. And then finally we went public in July of 2021. So I think the main reason was just there was an opportunity to raise quite a bit of capital at a great valuation, and felt like that could springboard us to where we wanted to be a few years later anyways.
Love it.
Yeah.
So from the initial 2 million seed round, how much capital did you raise from that up until going public? And what was that process like with these venture firms or seed angel type investors?
Yeah, we raised, I think it was like 48 million before we went public. Yeah. And then 200 million. Well, it ended up being a little bit less, but yeah, quite a bit when we went public. It's interesting. I feel like one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur was for this like kind of flexible lifestyle. And as you add more partners to the cap table, that's an interesting journey in and of itself, because you start to kind of work on it with people instead of like, hey, it's your own little thing.
Yep.
I tell entrepreneurs it's important to know, like, do you want to go homestead? Like, do you want to build a lifestyle business that's creates wealth for you and is sort of maybe more autonomy, or do you want to build a city and work with a lot of other people? So that's what it felt like. I think my vision of entrepreneurship was like, oh, I'm going to, just do this thing on my own, and you add partners and venture capitalists and it changes things. But it also really accelerated the business. Every time we raised around and invested, like it took us to a new level of growth. So that's more philosophical. We raised a seed round from New York, an awesome cardiologist that had a fund there that invested in Owlet. And then our Series A from a hardware fund in San Francisco. This guy from Israel, it's a dad, he's got 2 kids and used the product. He later he told us he was going to say no. And then his wife used the product and she was like, you have to invest in this company. So, and then he led the next 2 rounds for us. So.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And as I've always been curious, as kind of the co-founder, you and your initial 3 partners, and kind of the ownership that you had. How do you, as a founder, majority equity holder, how do you think about raising money and giving ownership to partners and the balance of capital, strategic partnership, and ownership, and trying to balance those out, not giving away the farm, right, for you, but bringing in partners that are going to help put fuel in the fire?
It's a really good question, and I don't know that there's like a right answer for all businesses. I think every business has got to be a little bit different. We needed capital early on to fund the development. It's a pretty high-tech product. Yeah. There's only a few companies that have, clinical grade pulse oximetry, and we're one of like 4 in the US that really have that. So that took capital. I also feel like, we wasted a lot of capital too, just whether it was, doing it for the first time or feeling like we could just go raise more if we needed it. I definitely feel like entrepreneurs waste a lot of capital. And so to the extent that you can raise 6 months later than you think you need it and just stay super lean and wait until you're kind of bursting at the seams to then take on more capital, I think it's a better strategy. I think you end up diluting less, you preserve more control over your business. I think it builds a healthier DNA into the business. When we went public and we had all of this capital, it was just amazing. Everybody felt like they needed more people on their teams, and then the business, grew, and it just became less and less efficient. And we've scaled back a little bit now, and it feels a lot healthier. So I think you got to kind of answer that for yourself. But I tell entrepreneurs, raise money and then try not to spend it. Just do everything you can not to spend that money, and then the true needs will come out, and that's what you'll end up investing in, and you'll be a lot healthier for it and dilute less. So it's
great. Yeah, great advice. I read merger with Sandbridge acquisition. Was that part of the SPAC or going public, or was that a separate?
That's right. Yeah. So you're essentially bought by a public entity. Yep. But it's a reverse IPO. So they buy you and then change the name to Owlet, and you still kind of run the company, and they own like 20% of it. Okay. Cool. So.
That's great. So what's your role like today, Kurt? I mean, CEO, co-founder, how do you spend your time?
Yeah, it evolves depending on the needs of the business. But I would say, the best advice I got from Jeremy Andrus actually is like the CEO's in charge of, people, culture, and vision. So that's probably where I spend a lot of my time is, do we have the right people on the bus? Are we organized correctly? Have I delegated, in the right way? At the end of the day, as the CEO, your job is to get results through people. So a lot on people, a lot on culture. How do we have the right processes and systems? Do people have the right expectations? And then, where are we going from here? Making sure that it's always really clear what are the objectives of this year, and then where are we going 5 years from now? So I see those as like my primary responsibilities. I also spend a lot of time, just in one-on-ones and meetings and just chatting with people and joining, operations meetings or product meetings or things like that, just to make sure I understand where the business is at, and then I can communicate back where we need to go.
Yeah, that's great. And about how many employees do you have right now?
We have about 80 today.
Okay. Yeah. And HQ is it Provo or?
It's in Lehigh.
Lehigh now. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's great. Love it, man. And then speaking of, the future for you. So what do you think the next few years looks like for Owlet? I mean, is there other avenues you want to go down, expanding the existing platform? What does that kind of plan look like?
Yeah, I think we're so excited. We just got our first FDA clearance a couple months ago. We've got another one in the pipeline, and then we're getting CE MedMark, which is for Europe. So we'll have kind of a global, regulatory clearance, which will allow us to be a medical device company. that opens a ton of doors, not only for distribution, but also, what we can do with the data that we have. We have the largest data set of infant health that's ever been collected. And what we really want to solve are some of these big problems like SIDS and heart defects, but we also want to create a better closed care loop between the hospital and the home. Number one reason for ER visits today are respiratory infections. It's basically like, my baby has a cold. Is it pneumonia? Is it RSV? What do I do? And we feel like we can answer those questions at home and save a ton of time and money, but also detect babies that need care sooner. So we want to build this pediatric health platform. And I think these clearances are going to kind of accelerate us to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's exciting. And yeah, again, congrats on the FDA. I feel like that's a huge step for kind of getting everyone on board with it. I love it. Well, outside of Owlet, are there, when you think about other business ventures or investing, I mean, I guess maybe honing in on investing, how are you investing your capital right now or your own personal money? I mean, and in terms of liquidity events, I don't know if there's been anything substantial for you yet, but when you look at investing or diversifying outside of Owlet as a CEO and co-founder, how are you thinking about that right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, most of my wealth is still locked up in Owlet,
yep.
and I see a ton of growth for Owlet over the next few years. I think we're just super dislocated, on the price today, and we're going to see a lot of good growth, especially with some of the things we're working on. So that's like still objective number one for me.
Yep.
I have had some liquidity, and I think for me it's really about just getting a kind of a good return. I work with my brother-in-law who runs a family office that he helps us with that, and we look for investments that kind of have, disproportionate upside with pretty good downside risk protection. We've invested, you were talking about some of the projects you guys do. We invested in Vineyard, which is the, mobile home park community, and they go in and they help clean up these communities and create better standards of living. And it's like this amazing business model that I had, no idea existed. So we do stuff like that. Some angel investments. I serve my mission in Mexico, and I really believe that there's a lot of opportunity there. So I've made some angel investments in Mexican startups, which is one of them's doing really well. So I might get my money back out of that,
Yeah.
So some stuff like that. And then, just kind of looking for opportunities. I put a bunch back into Owlet with our most recent raise. I just felt like it was a really good valuation and a good opportunity to grow. So I would say I've doubled down on Owlet, and I'm still pushing on that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love it. And I know you guys went public as a, now you have a publicly traded stock price. Like, I mean, as a founder and CEO, like how do you think about like the stock price and managing investors' expectations and just like, I don't know, if that whole aspect of being public and seeing that ticker every day. What's that? I don't know.
Yeah. I would say, like, I remember Jeremy telling me, he's like, don't ever go public because it's, that's just, it's hard to manage. It distracts people. And unfortunately I guess it's not unfortunately. Fortunately, we went public at the kind of the peak, SPACs and growth companies have seen a huge fall since then. So the stock price has only gone in one direction. I don't know that that's necessarily a reflection of like our execution or the value of the business, but the market for unprofitable growth companies it's fallen out.
Sure.
We had some issues with the FDA on top of that contributed. So I've only seen it go in one direction. And I think that's been, it's been healthy for me over time to just kind of let go of that and just focus on the fundamentals of the business. We're getting profitable this year. We've got our FDA clearances. We're starting to see really good growth. We've got a good product portfolio. And so, over time, I've just learned to kind of tune it out and just focus on building a good business. And I think we've got really aligned shareholders and partners around us, a really aligned board, a good exec team. And so we feel like we're in a position to go grow the business. And then I think the stock price will follow, and it might just be a little bit delayed, So
Sure.
my advice for people is like, just focus on the fundamentals of the business, and that will come. And I think there's a lot of CEOs that have had to kind of realize that going from the kind of the peak to where we're in a valley today. So
and no doubt you guys will get there. That's awesome. One thing that I like to ask, very successful individuals like yourself, Kurt, is maybe some habits you live by. So I don't know, things that you do daily or weekly or monthly or goal setting or, and maybe it's not anything super formal, but things in your life that have helped you.
Yeah. What I have is kind of like my dreams, I guess, or kind of the ideal life that I want to live. And then I try to break that down into just really simple steps. So it's like really big, kind of broad vision, And then I just come up with a few things that I put into a to-do list and just have those listed. And so like, I know that they're directionally tying to where I want to go. So that's kind of my system. And I don't know what it is about checking something off, but it just like lights me up.
Yes, so I'm like, the same way.
Pressing that button is so awesome. So I like that. That works for me. And then for the business, we do OKRs. I love OKRs. It's like you've got your strategy, your objectives, your strategy, and then it's essentially just like a glorified to-do list. So that's great process.
Love it, man. And you mentioned Jeremy. I don't know, are there any influential people in your life or mentors or maybe how you think about mentoring or getting advice, as a publicly traded company founder, anyone that's been really influential in your life? Would love to hear about it.
Yeah, man. So many people. I think my parents have been huge influences on my life. I talked about starting that like little paintball business. My dad would go from work to go fill up these big CO2 tanks and like put them in the trunk of his Camry. Like he was always really supportive of it. It's like his advice was always the opposite of being an entrepreneur, but like his actions were always super supportive of these things I wanted to do. So I thought that was awesome. My first, I think, real CEO mentor was Bryce Johnson with Zarbee's. I don't know if you know Bryce.
I've heard the company.
Yeah. So he built an awesome company, and we were talking. He was just leaving Zarbee's. I took him to lunch, and I was like, "Hey, I want you to be the CEO of Owlet." And I still remember this conversation where he's like, "Dude, I would never take that from you. Like, you're going to go through the biggest growth journey, of your life, and you're doing great things, and I believe in you." And so instead of him saying like, and we were in, I think, a really attractive position for him to step in. He knew his role as mentor was like, hey, let's build this guy up. And so he really built me up and gave me confidence to go and, tackle the hill. And so I look back on that, and he was just a great mentor along the way. Always super supportive. Jeremy's been a great mentor for me. He had twins, so we shipped him some units. He'd already invested in the company, and he called me. He's like, hey, dude, this is not ready for prime time. This, couldn't get these things connected to Wi-Fi. Like, oh no, this is Jeremy Andrus. Like, he's like my, the guy I look up to. So we sent somebody to his house. We finally got the units connected to Wi-Fi. And then it was like 4 months later, he called me. He's like, this is amazing. Like, we use these every night. We love the product. Like, how can we support? So he would, every time I needed advice, he'd make an hour on a schedule, and I'd go chat with him. And he's such a calm guy, he's like not worried about anything. He's always upbeat. So that was awesome. Yeah, and then my investors have been great mentors for me too. It's interesting the relationship I've built with them. Like, we've got these awesome friendships, and so they've been great mentors for me as well.
Love it. That's so good. Well, last couple of questions, Kurt. We'll wrap this up. Just in terms of advice you'd give to budding entrepreneurs or somebody wanting to start a business. I mean, there's a million things you could talk about, but maybe specific to your journey or what you've gone through. What would be a piece of advice you'd give to somebody starting up a business right now?
Yeah. I think that I think people don't realize this, but maybe they do. There's so much inherent failure in doing something truly new. Like, you just fail a lot, whether you're successful or not. Like, the path is failure. 9 out of 10 startups fail. I think the biggest advice I would give is like, detach yourself and your identity from what you're trying to work on. Like, make it fun, make it playful. I think you'll be more creative. That's something I didn't do early on. And it just like, my sense of self-worth or my mood would fluctuate with how the business was doing. And that's hell. Like, it just sucks. So you're not your business. You're working on your business. Stay outside of your business. I think you'll be more creative. You'll have more fun. Let it go. Investors are, like, you're the gladiator in the ring. Like, they're putting money on 30 companies. They're going to lose money on 27 of 30 companies. Don't feel bad about that. Like, be aggressive, be innovative. I think you'll make clearer decisions, and you'll enjoy it more. That's what I wish I'd done.
Yeah, that's such good advice, and resonates with me. We're getting our business off the ground. We're a year in, and it is so hard to differentiate your identity from the business. It's like you feel every up and down with the business is just directly emotionally tied to you as an individual. So I appreciate you sharing that, and something I'll try.
And early on, like, I would get feedback. Like, when the business wasn't doing well, everybody in the company feels it, right? You need to be the one person who's like, we can do it, guys. Like, you've got a smile on your face. And when you're dragged down with that, it kind of compounds it. So like, your job as a leader is you got to detach. You got to have the vision, know why you're making those decisions, but also just love yourself, let yourself fail every once in a while.
Yeah. So good. Well, last question, Kurt, and this is something I ask everybody is, when you think about success in life, kind of across all avenues, how do you define a life well lived or, success?
I don't know if I have that definition, but I'll just make something up on the spot. I'll just talk. I think
you do you.
I think you've got to have a clear set of goals and values, and then realize, like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So it's like a blend of knowing what you want, what you believe, and then also giving yourself a little bit of latitude to learn along the way. And ultimately, I think it's, just finding that area of passion where you feel happy and you feel motivated and you feel inspired, and you're able to bring that energy to those around you. And I don't think you can measure it in wealth. Like some of the happiest people I know, they're not wealthy. Some of the least happy people I know are super wealthy. And I think it's got to be measured in just that feeling of peace and confidence and happiness. And I think that's ultimately, what defines success is, like, if you're a scientist working in a lab and you love that, that's success. If you're an entrepreneur that just wants to build things and you've had 10 failures, but you're still at it and you're loving it, that's success. So I think it's just finding that place.
Love it. Well, no better way to end. Thank you so much, Kurt, for being on the show and sharing your story. It's been amazing.
Thanks for having me, Chase.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to The Chase Hudson Show. If you liked what you heard, please leave me a review and subscribe to this podcast. Reviews really help us to find better guests and to improve the overall quality of the show. If you'd like to connect with me directly or want to learn more about investing in real estate, send me a DM on Instagram at @officialchasehudson. Again, we really appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.